Hey guys, this is Josh Nelson from Nelson Elder Care Law, talking to you today on Live with a Lawyer, 3 p.m. every Wednesday, bringing you relevant topics, information, things that you might want to know. As always, feel free to leave comments below. If you have something that's a little bit more private than what you want to put out on Facebook, feel free to go ahead and direct message us, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. As always, you can give us a call at 678-250-9355 to be able to get a free sit down with one of the members of our legal team. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that hits pretty close to home. What would happen if you were Britney Spears? What happens if somebody comes and gets a conservatorship over you in the state of Georgia? So a lot of people don't realize whenever we look at this national news that it's handled on a state-by-state basis. So what happens with her out there is going to be a little different than what the outcome would be in Georgia. And so we're going to talk about it today, what you can do to avoid this situation for yourself or your loved one, as well as if you're on the other side, if you're in the dad's position on this, what do you need to do, how do you help, and then ultimately, how do we do this without spending as much money as they are? Is it just because she's wealthy? Is it just because she's rich? Or is it just because of the litigation in the court system? We're going to cover all that today. As always, feel free to drop in your comments, and let's get started. First things first, a conservatorship is literally the court taking away power from somebody to manage their own financial affairs. What it does is it says the proposed ward, Britney in this case, went through an episode or had a cognitive impairment issue or a mental health issue to the point where somebody that she knows, presumably somebody that loves her, that she trusted at some point in time, has decided to go forth and petition the courts to say she can't handle her own affairs. She's a danger to either herself or her finances. If it's a danger to herself, that's whenever we call it guardianship in Georgia. If it's a danger to her money, that's whenever we call it conservatorship. In Georgia, we do have a thing called professional conservatorships. It's not state-run. There's no real thing as being a ward of the state anymore. But as far as guardianships, we do have professionals that will step in and do that, but for the most part, it's a family member or a close friend. If you were Britney in this case, you're going through an issue that's arguably more of a mental health struggle rather than a cognitive impairment issue like Alzheimer's. Sometimes you see this with drug problems as well. And so her dad petitioned the court to say, let me manage things for her. In that case, she was deemed to not be able to even hire her own counsel. And this is pretty common for what we call proposed wards, or Britney in this case. So she was appointed an attorney for her own interests by the court. His name is Mr. Ingham. Mr. Ingham has represented her ever since this process started, all the way up until recently, but it sounds like now she's probably requesting other counsel. With Mr. Ingham being appointed as what's called the attorney for the proposed ward, in Georgia, 2 years ago, he would have only gotten $125. Do you think he'd be going through all this for $125? Probably not. If you haven't heard already, Mr. Ingham has gotten over $3 million for representing Britney in this case. He gets paid $475 by the court system, which really comes out of her funds. It's kind of crazy. She didn't get to pick the counsel. She's now arguing that her counsel has been ineffective, and she's paid him $3 million. That's just her side. That's not even talking about her dad's legal fees, which also can get paid out of her funds. Pretty crazy how quickly these can add up. But remember, if we have multiple attorneys, which is what litigation is, and a conservatorship action is always litigation, it adds up really fast at $475 an hour. So if she's paying $475, dad's paying $475, let's just round that up, call it $1,000 an hour, you can see where the costs get pretty prohibitive. In Georgia, a couple of years ago, like I said, the proposed ward's attorney only got $125. The real problem with that was they didn't do a whole lot for $125. So the counsel was often not what we would want if it was in our best interest. So last year, the legislature decided to say, The attorneys that are on this court-appointed list, whenever they act on behalf of a proposed ward, can charge a reasonable fee. What's a reasonable fee for most people? It's going to be around $300 to $350 an hour. So not necessarily cheap, but whenever this is your life on the line, your health, your money, you want somebody that's really going to have an interest in representing you and get paid for their time. One of the great things about this is it's drawn a little bit more talent to the court-appointed list to help people be able to make sure that their interests are getting represented properly. The downside of this, though, is it's now made it so that even uncontested guardianships and conservatorships are drastically more expensive than they used to be. So remember, before it was only $125. Now the legal fees for the proposed ward could be thousands, and often are usually around $3,000 to $5,000 just for the proposed ward, and usually around $7,000 to $10,000 for the person seeking to take the power away from the proposed ward. Whenever we talk about most situations for this, it's an adult parent taking guardianship or conservatorship over an adult child, so a child that's just turned 18 often, that is unable to make their own financial or medical decisions, whether that be because of a disability or a cognitive impairment or a developmental issue. Whenever we start talking about the other side of it, what we primarily focus on is a lot of times whenever we get older, we get an ailment, Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, or strokes, that make it so that we can no longer make our own financial or medical decisions. That's where Nelson Elder Care Law helps a lot of people be able to get access to our loved ones, usually our parents' funds, in order to pay for care that they need, such as an assisted living, somebody to come into their home, maybe even a nursing home. A lot of times the reason for this is to be able to go sell their primary residence. So if they've lived in a home for years and they now need to switch to an assisted living and they can't sign their own closing documents, and we don't have a power of attorney in place, this is the only way to get that deal done. As you can see, it's pretty expensive. The whole all-in process for most people is going to be $10,000. Now, compared to what Britney's going through on $3 million just for her side, that's a drop in the bucket. But what's the other alternative? You plan in advance. You make sure somebody has a power of attorney granted to them. You make sure that somebody has an advanced healthcare directive. These will be the things that you can actually nominate who you would want to be your conservator, who you'd want to be your guardian, in the case that you need one. But in most cases, you wouldn't even have to go to the court because these legal tools give the authority, if drafted properly, to avoid that process. How much do those tools cost? Pennies on the dollar compared to what we're talking about with these conservatorship actions. Why is there a contested issue going on with Britney? She's worried that she has now recovered from the temporary ailment that she had, and now she's able to make her own decisions. This is a systemic problem that senators like Warren are trying to address. One of the biggest problems that you have with this is that whenever somebody has a conservatorship over them, they have literally been stripped the rights to handle their own funds. They have no money to their own name. Any income that they receive is handled by their conservator. This creates a systemic problem that once somebody has a conservatorship over them, it's very, very hard to get it removed. And this is Britney's most recent complaint that she made in court, is that first, her counsel, which she has paid $3 million to, never informed her that the conservatorship could be ended. That's a point of fact that will be determined in the court, but if that's true, that's definitely a big issue. The other problem that you have is that if somebody calls in or somebody wants to get a conservatorship removed, they don't have access to funds. And without access to funds, their only ability to retain an attorney is through a grant program like senior legal aid, Atlanta legal aid, which normally don't handle contested conservatorships or seeking a court-appointed attorney. A court-appointed attorney in most cases is going to go what's called status quo. That's an old Latin term or a legal phrase that means let it lay. Let it stay the way that it is. And so if we already have a conservatorship in place, it's very hard to prove wrongdoing in order to have that removed. In the speech that Britney gave during her trial, she talked about how she was forced to be on birth control. She wasn't allowed to have more children. She wasn't allowed to be able to see certain people. This is a very, very serious matter for a guardianship. It's taking away somebody's rights. But the question is, was it so egregious that they're going to overturn her father's version of this? In Georgia, the answer would be no. They're going to probably uphold this unless they look into the reports that the guardian or conservator, in this case Britney's father, files to show that something's wrong. So these are proceedings that are overseen on a yearly basis by the courts. A guardian and a conservator have to file reports first within 60 days and then ultimately at least every year, if not more frequently, to show where the money's going, how the person's health is doing, and that there's still a need for this ongoing structure. Usually, these are just paper reports that you send in, and in that case, it's very, very hard to say that they're wrong as long as the balances match what they're supposed to. Again, this is a very important tool for most cases. Whenever we see in the news that people are taking advantage of others, there's a Netflix documentary on it. There's some lawsuits out of Florida that allow for non-family members to do this rather easily for seniors. But in Georgia, the judges really do look out for the citizens' well-being. We have a good system in place. It can always be better, but like I just said, even in the last 2 years, we're making strides in the right direction with getting people competent counsel that has a vested interest in making sure that your rights are preserved. This is always a scary subject, but it's something that not having a plan in place often creates the need for. If you want to get a plan in place, as always, give us a call. Nelson Elder Care Law, 678-250-9355. If you have some questions, feel free to shoot them in through our messages. Otherwise, we'll be happy to come in and sit down with our team and know what we need to do in the future to be able to get you the guidance to protect yourself and your loved ones. As always, thank you for watching Live with a Lawyer every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Again, I'm Josh Nelson, attorney at law in Georgia. This information is not for your own legal case. This is just general information and commentary. In order to get guidance for your specific case, you need to come in and see us, and we'll be glad to walk you through it. Thanks so much and have a great week.